How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
You are tuned in to the Foul Weather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
Most folks know the Clint Eastwood movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Well, this is the good, the bad, and the ugly in population trends among species of waterfowl through time. Why do some species populations do well? The good. Why do some species cycle so strongly? The bad. And why did some species populations tank and then never recover? The ugly. From success stories like Gadwall and Teal to the strong cycles of mallards to the plummets and never to return once to their great populations like pintails and scaup, we dig deep into what makes the population trends of different species of waterfowl so variable. That and a look at the recent and future weather patterns affecting ducks. All today on the Foul Weather Podcast. In response to a massive amount of misinformation coming across your wavelengths, the Foul Weather Podcast embarked on the 2025 Data Stream series. It can be attractive to find conspiracies that help explain what you observe as a duck hunter, or maybe you've even thought up some fun fake news yourself. The reality is that the long history of data used in waterfowl conservation and management in North America is a success story that everyone deserves to hear. Bumps and bruises we have, but dedicated we are as the duck people across duck country USA, dedicated to the long-term health of ducks and duck hunting. This series dives deep into how the surveys, banding, and harvest surveys and models work. Join us to learn more and share this great information with all the great people across duck country USA. Remember that this last season you knew where the ducks were at before the ducks knew where they were at. We're very thankful for our every week listeners. You know who you are. Those that never miss a single migration forecast episode each Monday morning. Y'all are as ate up as me about ducks, duck biology, and duck migration. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the Foul Weather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at, right? Shoot the ducks from the north before they know where they're at. Also, just a quick reminder as well, take a minute to rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. We appreciate your support very, very much. I'm your host, DrMike, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. With turkey season behind us and working with the wettest May in 130 years in Jack's Reef country, we are battling the elements once again. We started our wood stove fire for the first time ever at the farm on the 1st of June. We've never had it going this long into spring. And then 3 days later, it was 90 degrees. Whew. We had a pint with the neighbors on the porch the other afternoon, and none of us could remember weather this cold, this late, but also such crazy warm early in May. But now this. Our turkey nests most likely all failed locally. We found dead bluebirds in our bluebird boxes, and I watched a newborn fawn basically looking like it was failing in our neighbor's lawn, being licked by a doe trying to dry her nearly dead fawn out in driving 40-degree rain for 3 days last week. Wow. In the non-human animal world, the non-human animal world, I just said that, nature is not nice and it picks the winners. As out of doors folks, we know if you spend a day in the cold and wet in the marsh, you know that you are not really built for it. Oh, I'm tough. You might think so. But most of us would never survive a single winter outdoors. In nature, there is no comfy couch. There is no Netflix. There is no turning the thermostat up. And yet we are turning the thermostat down daily, right? We must realize that we are putting pressure on the wild places we love and where we pursue animals for our own animal connections, for a clean kill, a clean animal not filled with chemicals, and for food for the family. A place to connect to your evolutionary past, animal v. animal. It is not lost on me that animal v. animal is real and alive like it was millennia ago. No matter how or why you pursue ducks, you know what we are talking about. The challenge of pulling them through the trees into the hole. The work on your duck call to make it sound more like a duck. The smell of the marsh that gives you goosebumps. Learning how to live with and train your companions, your retriever. The sights, sounds, smells, feel of the marsh. The big timber, the big lake. All that is what gets your spidey senses going. You are hardwired for the hunt. Never forget that. And never forget that is what brings you back every year, every morning, every cold, dark day, brewing coffee well before the rest of humanity even thinks about peeling themselves out of bed. But also let us not forget that the struggle is real to survive in the wild, especially in places where wild lands are dwindling. Stewardship of the lands and animals we live with must be part of the equation and part of the experience of animal v. animal. Up next, a brief weather report, so please stick with us. Beckman Game Calls has it dialed in. If you want a duck call that is adjustable to your air pressure and sounds like a duck, this is it. I've blown a ton of different calls in my life, but this one is the real deal. Look, we don't endorse just anything. We are only going to put forward a call that works. The Edison by Chris Beckman of Beckman Game Calls. Yeah, this beauty sounds like a duck. I only know of one published research paper focused on what makes a duck call sound like a duck. Go look me up and you will see that colleagues and I have the only paper published in scientific literature about what makes a duck call sound like a duck. For sure, Chris Beckman did his homework and this call sounds like a duck. This guy knows how to make a duck call, period. But don't just take my word for it. Here's the proof. First, a hen recording, and then the Edison in the big woods of Arkansas. Visit them today at BeckmanGameCalls.com. All right, before we jump into the good, the bad, and the ugly, let's take a quick look at weather patterns currently affecting duck production and those that are already showing signs of affecting migration and winter for ducks. First, much of the Canadian prairies are dry, other than some southern portions of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. But the Dakotas, especially the Coteau or Prairie Hills region, got a good amount of rain from, say, 3 to 5 inches in some places, and then have had some regular rains after that to help fill back up basins. Nowhere early enough to affect the settling patterns of ducks, but it will help with production through duckling survival. We also look to get another 3 to 4 inches in that same area over the next 2 weeks. Also, with some increased rains in Montana at the same time, so not perfect, but better than dry as a bone. Thinking about other areas, parts of the east were insanely wet, too much so in about 40 degrees for weeks in May, as we noted in the opener. None of that is good for nesting in our part of the world, so lots of mallard nests probably failed. Wood ducks or cavity nesters did fine, if not better, in this wet year, possibly with good wetland conditions coming off. So let's hope for a decent hatch there from the wood ducks. But I think mallards are going to be into second nests for the most part. People are seeing very few mallard broods in the east right now. Looking at migration habitat, some folks are having a hard time getting water off of moist soil units and ag areas as the Gulf Coast up through the Ohio River Valley and south of that over the Atlantic coast has seen system after system with lots of rainfall. So a lot of difficulty managing moist soil and plantings, but at least it gives us a jump start on water for the fall. We're not going to be in drought by the looks of it. We will see how the season plays out though, but lots of time to get weeds to grow for ducks for sure. Hurricane season is thought to be above average for the coming year, but we also have a lot of Sahara dust right now, which can suppress hurricane activity. So stay tuned here, and we will continue to report on the hurricane outlook from NOAA. We also look to not be in an El Nino or La Nina for next fall and winter, but instead be in what's called an ENSO neutral case. This makes long-term weather predictions more difficult for me and for all people in general. But from our own research, we've also seen that weather severity indices can be relatively severe or mild, right? for more or less severe than normal weather conditions that cause duck migration under an ENSO-neutral situation. So continue to stick with us all the way through the developments of this process for the year. We will continue to have our finger on the pulse of these atmospheric systems and let you know what's coming up next. Up next, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so please stick with us. How many days have you had empty skies over the duck blind? Cameras full of deer except when you're there. Turkeys that just won't turkey right. Your property can be more with wildlife strategies. It is no secret that hiring a consultant, an expert in managing water, woods, and fields, an expert in duck foods and deer and turkey habitat, an expert in hunting pressure management. Well, it is no secret that hiring a consultant yields better habitat for the critters you chase. Less empty skies, more quality days of field, more smiles for miles with family and friends. If that's your game and goal, contact Ryan Delaney at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. And hey, here's the deal. I'm filled up for summer 2025 with clients up north, but if our northern friends have a property in need of some love, contact me at DrMike at foulweather.co for a summer 2026 site visit. The Farmland Group is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisal across Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee, and growing. Contact them today at farmlg.com. Hey, I'm telling you, do not hesitate because these folks are busy buying, selling, and providing consulting and management strategies that build value into your portfolio and your land. So get in the queue today. Get on their radar. Get on their books. Man, y'all won't be disappointed. Contact the Farmland Group today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. Okay, so let's jump into the meat and potatoes of this episode. Variations in population trends among species of waterfowl is obvious even to the casual observer. But what runs them and why are they different? First and foremost, the reason for these changes through time is rarely, if ever, harvest because of well-regulated hunting. But let's start with the good, and in that, I'd put gadwall, greenwings, blue wings, and shoveler. We also could put in resident Canada geese, which is technically a misnomer because they're technically not residents. They do make seasonal movements when needed to avoid freezing conditions and snow. So technically, we should be calling them temperate nesting geese because they nest in the temperate zones of North America. But I digress, I guess. So what makes a duck in the good category? Let's start with gadwall, which have increased the most since 1955 among species of ducks. Now, if you are a sharp listener, you are going to remember that we said you really should not compare data before 1975 to present-day numbers from the breeding population survey. But in a lot of cases, the changes in abundance are so obvious that it's not a major issue. Mostly using data before and after 1975 can become an issue when running population models because it creates inconsistencies in the math process and introduces error. But for this case, let's go ahead and talk about the low gadwall numbers from the traditional survey area of the BPOP in 1958, which was 502,000. But by 2017, gadwall were over 8 times greater in size at 4.18 million gadwall. So what happened? I'm going to speculate some, but we know that gadwall rely on semi-permanent and permanent wetlands more than other ducks for raising broods. So overall, that type of wetland that gadwall use and succeed in are increasingly common because of wetland consolidation from farmers adding drain tile and draining smaller wetlands into larger basins and making more consistently wet, large wetlands. So that is one aspect. They also eat more submerged aquatic vegetation during the non-breeding period than other species, and we've seen 2 factors that would help gadwall return to the breeding grounds in better condition. 1, we built a ton of reservoirs along our rivers, creating a lot more stable habitat that gadwall tend to use during the non-breeding period. And 2, we have way more nutrients going into our waterways from agricultural fertilizer runoff, which would in many cases benefit the proliferation of submerged aquatic vegetation. So the deck has kind of been stacked in favor of the gadwall. I'd also argue that a lot of the same factors affecting gadwall have helped shovelers, but that also includes large complexes of catfish ponds on wintering areas for shovelers. A third or fourth, maybe we're under a fourth one, both gadwall and shoveler are also late nesting species, which seems to be a common theme among the good, or the species that have increased fairly steadily over time are all late nesters. Increases in green-winged teal and blue-winged teal is seemingly a bit more complex, but could also be explained to their behavior of nesting later than other species. So conditions have likely increasingly favored them as well. Possibly that wetland and grass condition leading to nest and brood success nowadays is delayed to favor late nesters. Certainly something favors late nesting species, be it a changing climate and water regime or grassland conditions. Something favors these late nesting species. Specifically, even since 1975, when the SOP changed in the BPOP, or Standard Operating Procedure of the Breeding Population Survey, greenwings increased from 1.6 million to 4.3 million from 1975 till 2016, and bluewings went from 5.9 to 9.2 million by 2012. Of course, there's been fluctuations and even declines in recent years, just like every other species, but these two are way above their early baseline years, as well as gadwall and shovelers. Okay, on to the bad. Here I place mallards, black ducks, widgeon, and canvasbacks. I'm going to leave mallards for last because I got a little bit of a rant on this one once again, but let's just hit on black ducks first, which saw a massive decline from the 50s to the 80s that was largely based on habitat change at a massive scale. Eastern forest where black ducks breed and thrive were cleared en masse, and the eastern seaboard was turned into a megalopolis wasteland. We went to a one black duck limit in the United States for years, and the population stabilized but never regained ground. But then recently we went to a 2 black duck limit in the U.S. and saw no measurable effect on the population. So seemingly can sustain that 2 black duck limit. We also released millions of mallards into the black duck wintering and breeding range as the black duck population declined, and that could not have helped either. The core breeding area of black ducks, which is boreal forest and beaver pond complexes in Canada, is still holding strong. But black ducks are a shell of their once glory days. This is a poster child for coastal destruction and land conversion away from forested wetlands to open farm fields and drained wetlands. Next are widgeon, which have a population that bounces up and down around a long-term average of 2.5 million in the traditional survey area, but we know less about them and factors affecting their population dynamics and population change than many other ducks. We also have a slightly downward trend through time in the traditional BPOP area, but then again, they do breed outside of that area as well. We stick them in the bad category, I think, because of a lack of information and that slight downward trend. That said, in 2024, they were at 2.9 million and above the long-term average, and along with greenwings, were one of the few species that showed an increase, possibly because of both of these species' tendency to also nest towards the boreal more so than other species. Then king canvasback comes next, never at a really high population level and sitting around 600,000 breeding pairs as a long-term average. Cans have always been thought to be susceptible to harvest, at least females, and especially when the prairies are dry. During wet years, and with substantial food resources on migration in winter, cans can handle more harvest. They've really taken it on the chin, like the black duck from destruction of the Chesapeake Bay region, which was a traditional wintering area for cans. Poor water quality from nutrient runoff into Chesapeake Bay made their traditional food resources plummet. And this was from all sources. I would not even get close to saying this was farming. That's the megalopolis, Baltimore, D.C., everything up and down the Susquehanna is dumping into the Chesapeake, and it was like one big filthy bath, right? And so it made their traditional food resources plummet, that aquatic vegetation plummet. Cans have also moved towards staying in the Finger Lakes region of New York, bays of the Great Lakes, and Lake St. Clair, and the upper Mississippi River, where there are more consistent food resources, and as the climate warms and they can stay longer. Specifically, when Lake St. Clair was colonized by zebra mussels, the water cleared up, and water celery, a favored food of cans, boomed. Their progression during migration generally goes Upper Miss, then Lake St. Clair, the Lake Erie Bays. Then if it actually gets cold enough, they end up on the Finger Lakes of New York and points farther south. All right, on to the mid-continent mallard. And why put it into the bad category? Well, right now they are at about as low as their population has ever been since we started surveys. There have been like 3 lows, and we're kind of close to that at this point. And they are really taking a beating from drain tile and wetland consolidation. Mallards exploit seasonal wetlands and seasonal resources throughout their annual cycle. This is why moist soil works so well to sustain and attract them during migration in winter. They exploit those shallow seasonal resources everywhere they go. That also makes their cycle of ups and downs that much greater because of the wet and dry. It also leads duck hunters to lose their shit every time the population drops because they are by far the most sought-after species of waterfowl across North America. Okay, so they cycle. So why are they in the bad category? We are trashing their highly productive breeding grounds in the prairies, and honestly, as duck hunters, many of y'all are just sitting on the sidelines bitching about the season lengths and bag limits. Look, most of the great people across duck country are politically conservative, or at least right of center, which makes a ton of sense. But then it all gets in our own way. We don't feel it okay to regulate farmers, so maybe we're okay with financial incentives through the conservation title of the Farm Bill, but we don't want to regulate anything about farmers because they grow our food, which is partially correct. Heck, most of our corn goes to ethanol and 52% of our soybeans are exported. Also, who asked for all that corn and soybean byproduct in our food? You want to talk about a health crisis in this country? Start talking about stuff that's stuffed into our food that we never asked for. Anyway, it's complicated. But you are willing to turn a blind eye to modern row crop agriculture that is absolutely crushing duck habitat. But then you stare at talk of reduced seasons and limits to save the ducks and cheer for that additional regulation. So you are asking for more regulations that is ineffective. And that is a liberal attitude. To blindly follow a policy that is ineffective at saving the ducks anyway. We've wasted way too much time on this discussion. You are asking for more regulation by the government on harvest that will do nothing to save the ducks. Talk about government inefficiencies? That is what you are asking for. So let's get off the sidelines. Call, write, and engage otherwise with your elected officials for policies that keep grass and wetlands on the planet. Right? Not sitting on the sidelines. We are doing the absolute complete opposite right now. We are destroying mallard habitat daily. And then we are also talking about defunding the entities that keep tabs on our ducks, the USGS Bird Banding Lab and Research Centers, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Migratory Bird Program, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, which is the vehicle of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan that has restored millions of acres of duck habitat, is in jeopardy, or at least being reorganized so that it is nearly impossible for it to work efficiently. All the people that work so hard for the ducks, and yes, effectively and efficiently, are about to get a huge axe falling on them. Then how do we even track the destruction of mallard habitat with all that gone? We won't be able to do so. And the big corporate machine that is destroying acre after acre in the name of progress steams ahead. And heck yeah, I'm all for progress, but not at the cost of our ducks, our wetlands, our grasslands, and clean water and air. It's all on the chopping block. So that's why I put mallards in the bad category. Because we've sat on the sidelines and asked like liberals for ineffective government regulations while letting destruction of what we as Americans hold dear. Skies filled with ducks and a healthy place to live. On to the ugly. This one is pretty simple. It's pintails, scaup, and eastern mallards. Of course, folks are going to argue for other species in all these categories, but pintails is an easy one because we ain't getting back to historic highs of these in this population. So you see, hen pintails and modern agriculture just don't mesh well. Pintails tend to be coastal species during winter, or they move towards the coast, which, as noted, we have treated very poorly. Same for the scaup. They are a coastal species in the winter months. But let's start with pintails first. A hen pintail really likes to see from her nest. So they traditionally use native shortgrass prairie, and they are an early nester. Well, shortgrass prairie is probably the most converted prairie ecosystem, so most of that is now gone. It's farmed. So what replaced that shortgrass prairie? Well, really nothing that was of the highest quality. And that was the first grass that was destroyed in the kind of progress of turning the prairies over. But we often put in wheat on that same shortgrass prairie ground, and wheat in the spring kind of mimics the short grass that hen pintails like to sit in. So what happens is they nest prior to plows coming, then plows come along and till in millions of nests. Okay, nowadays we have better winter wheat varieties, which has helped some, but the reality is that the preferred nesting habitat for pintails is just gone and not returning. They're also a subarctic nester in Alaska, along Hudson Bay, and elsewhere where the habitat is different, but structurally the same in early spring short grasses. So how can we go to 3 pintails, some of you continue to ask, if the population went from 10 million to 2 million in the traditional survey area? Well, I think we beat that one to death. Harvest is not driving that population, and we never gained anything from a lower limit. So we're going to 3 because the current harvest model suggests the population can sustain that harvest. And the sky isn't falling because there's safety mechanisms built in. If for some reason we are wrong and the population starts to decline, we can ratchet that back, and those pintails will bounce right back to where they are at that kind of dismally low level. But a lot of folks still have lots of them. Heck, where we're over here, we get eastern pintails that come into our part of the world, and we got groups of 5,000 flying around on opening day and in just like 90, 100-acre wetlands at times. So there's still a lot of pintails to go around. On to scaup. That one is still confusing to all of us. The reality is that a great paper came out years ago showing that harvest was not driving the population, and they are also among the most abundant duck species that we have, but we have insanely stupid restrictive limits and season lengths because a fully revised scaup model has not been developed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Mike Bird's office. Of course, reducing staff will not help us get to that harvest strategy any sooner. So scaup were supposedly around a high of 8 million, which may not be reality. I'll hit on that in a second. You see the BPOP is mostly, the survey itself is mostly designed for mallards, and scaup are still migrating during the survey. And how they migrate varies among years. Some years they are settled on breeding grounds already ahead of the survey, not most years, and then a lot of years they're migrating with the survey and may be counted 2, 3, or 4 times. My own study tracking the progression of the BPOP survey from south to north, and also at the same time GPS-marked lesser scaup, showed that this is common. Double counting is common. We likely count the same scaup more than once, or maybe we only count them once on different years. So what we get are unrealistic changes in counts among years that can't be biologically possible. So maybe we never had 8 million, but instead 6 million scaup. But we are at a low that seems to be trickling along fairly consistency with a few bumps, up and down since the decline in the 1980s. But again, it's not harvest driving any of this. We certainly did lose diver hunting culture with the big boats and layout boats by going to stupid 30-day and 1 or 2 scaup limits. Very few people go to shoot scaup for a limit so low. Heck, my rig now is nearly 100% puddle ducks and geese. I don't even think I have a handful of bluebill decoys left anymore. So we put scaup into kind of that ugly category. It's complex. We're not quite sure what's driving the population. We know that reproductive output and hen survival has declined, and that may be linked to other parts of the season, possibly during migration in winter, and then what type of condition they return in. Last, we're going to hit on eastern mallards, which declined for 20 years before the Atlantic Flyway folks did any serious digging. Declined from 1.2 million to 800,000, right, over a 20-year period. In a lot of places, 95% of the eastern mallard population has greater than 10% game farm mallard genes in them, and the percentage of mallards with substantial introgression of those game farm genes is moving west. So the eastern population of mallards decline, but then also has the Great Lakes region population of mallards has also declined as game farm genes moved west. We now know that increased game farm genes lead to shorter migrations, that is, they don't go as far south. So what do people do when their mallards don't show up in the south? They put out more game farm mallards, likely making the problem worse. We really need to get a handle on if game farm mallards are the demise of eastern mallards and if it is a threat to our mid-continent mallard population. The evidence suggests that the game farm mallard of European descent, heck, maybe we just start calling them illegal immigrants. The evidence suggests that these game farm mallards of European descent, that they are a completely different beast. And when they breed with our wild North American mallards, it's not a good thing. But whether it is the demise of wild mallards in North America is still to be determined. But heck, the only thing at stake is the integrity of the North American mallard population, right? Why we aren't throwing everything we have at understanding how game farm mallards are affecting wild mallards in North America is beyond me. Mostly it's probably political, because you know who shoots these things? Well, for one, politicians from D.C., but also wealthy and influential entities that seem to not care about the ethics of shooting flying targets or about anything but killing for themselves. They don't seem concerned about future generations. But hey, that's my ethics comment, not my science comment. We have to get the science on this one right. All right. Another good one, folks. Keep track of us this summer while we run the Foul Weather Podcast Young Waterfowl Professional Series, where we meet and interview the next generation of waterfowl and wetlands conservation leaders. These folks are our future. Go check out the episode last week with PhD student Grant Rhodes, who is using thermal cameras on drones to find and track broods. And another quick note, this coming week, the Foul Weather Podcast is taking a week off for a trip to the great state of Utah. So see you again in 2 weeks, my great friends across Duck Country, USA. In the meantime, play catch-up on the 2025 Data Stream series that continues to fight the good fight against misinformation and liberal attitudes asking for more ineffective regulations on our duck seasons. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.